The vanishing husband. The Mediterranean sun had risen with the brilliance of a painter's brush, spilling gold across the rippling waters as the luxury cruise ship Mediterranean Jewel prepared to set sail from Barcelona's bustling harbor. On its decks, couples laughed, families snapped photographs, and champagne glasses clinked in anticipation of 7 days of leisure and exploration. Yet in one of the most lavish suites aboard the ship, Tori Hamilton sat motionless on the edge of the bed, her hands instinctively pressed against her swollen stomach, the steady kicks of the life growing inside her grounding her against the storm of emotions beginning to rise within. At 7 months pregnant, she had dreamed of this voyage as a final sanctuary, a baby moon meant to restore the spark in her marriage and remind her husband, Bradley, of the promises they once whispered in candlelit rooms. Instead, she found herself staring at a cold and empty bed where his presence should have been, her heart tightening as though the walls of the cabin themselves were closing in. Bradley's absence was not new. It had become an echo that followed her for months, creeping into their dinners, their conversations, their quiet moments. Yet on this morning, as the ship's engines vibrated beneath her feet and Barcelona faded into the horizon, his absence became more than a discomfort. It became a gaping hole that words could not explain. On the nightstand lay the note that would change the course of her life. Hurriedly scribbled, the ink pressed too hard into the paper, a message stripped of tenderness. Had to fly back. Business emergency. Enjoy the cruise. We'll talk when you get home. B. There was no apology, no declaration of love, no attempt at comfort, just an abrupt dismissal, as if she were a client on his endless list of priorities rather than the woman carrying his child. Tori clutched the letter, her mind a whirl of disbelief. How could any man abandon his pregnant wife on a ship in open waters with nothing more than a note? The idea was so surreal that her instincts rebelled against it. She replayed the morning again, trying desperately to find an explanation she could cling to. At breakfast, he had barely touched his food, his eyes flickering between his phone and the waves outside. He muttered about deals, about acquisitions, about calls he couldn't miss, and she had done what she always did. Nodded, smiled faintly, told herself that once the baby arrived, things would slow down, that Bradley would remember the meaning of family. But even as she thought it, deep down she had felt the widening distance, like cracks running through glass, invisible at first, but impossible to repair once the shattering began. She rose unsteadily, pressing her hand into her back to ease the dull ache that pregnancy had made her constant companion, and walked toward the balcony. The sea stretched endlessly before her, blue and unbroken, a mirror reflecting a life that now seemed equally uncertain. She remembered how Bradley had insisted on this trip, calling it their last chance to be free before parenthood. She had imagined sunsets, whispered promises, the warmth of his hand against hers as they dreamed about their child. Instead, she was left with emptiness, a gnawing silence that clawed at her chest. The unopened champagne bottle on the table mocked her with its glittering promise of celebration that would never come. Her phone was useless, no signal reaching this far into the open waters. The last message she had from him glowed on the screen like a cruel taunt. Gone for quick meeting. Back soon. Love you. Those words, written only hours ago, now felt like a lie etched in digital stone. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, counting her breaths the way her Navy mother had taught her when she was a girl. 4 in, 4 out, again and again until her pulse steadied. Her father's voice echoed from the past, stern yet strangely comforting. Control the storm inside, and you can weather anything outside. A knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. Standing there was a middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform, her expression carefully neutral, a folded envelope in her hand. Mrs. Hamilton, I'm Maria from housekeeping, she said softly, her Spanish accent coloring her words. Your husband asked me to deliver this after departure. The sight of another envelope made Tori's stomach drop. She accepted it with trembling hands, her throat tightening. With a swift tear, she unfolded the page inside. It was the same words, the same careless dismissal, written on hotel stationery. Confirmation that this was not a misunderstanding, not an accident. He had planned his exit, timed it with the ship's departure, and left her stranded in the middle of what was supposed to be a shared dream. Her knees buckled and Maria hurried forward to steady her. Are you all right, Mrs. Hamilton? The kindness in her tone cut through Tori's shock, but she could only manage a nod. forcing the tears to stay behind her lashes. "Yes, thank you. I just need a moment." Maria left with a sympathetic glance, closing the door behind her, and Tori collapsed into the nearest chair, clutching her stomach as though holding on to the one anchor she had left. The baby shifted within her, a restless reminder that she was not as alone as she felt. Then, as if orchestrated by fate itself, the ship's intercom crackled to life. A commanding male voice filled the cabin, crisp and resonant, carrying decades of authority. "Good afternoon, passengers. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard the Mediterranean Jewel. My crew and I are honored to serve you during this 7-day voyage." Tori's heart stopped. The name that followed pierced her like a harpoon. "I am Captain James Blackwood." The world tilted. Captain James Blackwood. Her father. The man she had not spoken to in 3 long years. The man who had missed more of her life than he had been present for. A man defined by duty, by medals, by the Navy career that always came first. And now, impossibly, he was the one commanding the ship on which her entire life had just collapsed. She sank back into the chair, her mind spinning. Memories flashed. The proud figure in dress whites who walked her down the aisle but left halfway through the reception for an urgent call. The stern voice telling her he couldn't make her high school graduation because of deployment. The little girl sitting on a porch swing, waiting for a father who would not come home when he promised. She had sworn she would never let duty overshadow love in her own family. Had sworn she would never raise her child the way she had been raised. Always second to the mission. Yet now here she was, abandoned by her husband, forced to reckon with the father who had abandoned her in a different way. Her chest rose and fell as the waves crashed against the hull, the ship surging forward into the endless blue. Bradley's betrayal was a wound, sharp and fresh, but beneath it something darker stirred. A whisper that this was not merely a husband's affair, not merely a broken promise. It was a setup, deliberate and cruel, and though she could not yet see the shape of it, she felt it coiling in the shadows like a storm waiting to break. The captain's daughter. The bridge of the Mediterranean Jewel was a world of polished steel, glowing screens and disciplined silence. A far cry from the emotional hurricane inside Tori Hamilton. When the doors opened to reveal her father standing tall in his crisp uniform, time seemed to collapse in on itself. Admiral James Blackwood looked exactly as she remembered. Impossibly straight posture, silver hair combed with military precision, jaw set like granite. But it wasn't his uniform that made her chest tighten. It was his eyes, ocean blue and unwavering. The same eyes that had once scanned the horizon for enemies and, too rarely, softened when he bent down to lift her into his arms. Those eyes now locked onto her, not as an officer greeting a passenger, but as a father recognizing the daughter he had not seen in years. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, a taut rope frayed with memory and regret. Tori wanted to scream, to ask why fate had trapped her on a ship commanded by the very man she had promised herself she would never need again. She wanted to collapse into his arms the way she had as a child after scraping her knee, to feel that protective strength she had once relied on. Instead, she straightened her spine and forced her voice into steadiness even though her heart was unraveling. "Hello, Dad," she said, the word foreign on her tongue, both intimate and estranged. The officers around them busied themselves with charts and instruments, a carefully orchestrated dance of pretending not to eavesdrop while listening to every word. Admiral Blackwood dismissed them with a nod, and soon the vast bridge felt unbearably empty except for the two of them. "Victoria," he said, his voice deep and commanding yet softened by something she could not name. "Commander Torres has briefed me on your situation. He didn't say your husband abandoned you. He didn't say I'm sorry for what you're going through. He said situation as if her heartbreak were a tactical problem to be solved." Her fists clenched at her sides. Of course he would reduce her life into operational terms. He had done it her entire childhood. Deployments explained as necessities, missed birthdays catalogued like collateral damage. She swallowed hard, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's not a situation. It's my marriage. It's my life." He didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened as he studied the tablet Torres had handed him. Harbor records confirmed Bradley Hamilton disembarked at Barcelona with a female companion, Elena Vasquez. They boarded a 10:15 flight to New York. His tone was clinical, stripped of sympathy, a briefing rather than comfort. The words hit Tori like a slap, yet beneath the bluntness, she detected something else. Anger restrained and simmering, directed not at her but at the man who had wronged her. She turned away, staring out at the endless blue stretching through the bridge's panoramic windows. The sea mocked her with its calm, as if the universe itself were indifferent to the collapse of her world. Her father's voice broke the silence. "How long?" She blinked, not understanding. He clarified, "How long has the affair been happening?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know. Months, maybe years." I ignored the signs. I told myself it was stress, business, the usual excuses. Her voice cracked despite her effort to hold steady. I trusted him. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. The Admiral's steel softened, just slightly, enough for her to glimpse the man who had once taught her to tie knots and read the stars. "Trusting your spouse is not a weakness, Victoria. It's what marriage requires. The failure is his, not yours." The words nearly broke her. For years, she had built a wall between them, brick by brick, convinced that his version of love had been conditional on discipline and obedience. Yet here he was, reminding her that faith in others was not a flaw. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of Bradley's cold note burned too brightly. Before she could answer, a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Grace Murphy, her college roommate and closest friend, striding onto the bridge with little regard for protocol. Grace was the kind of woman who carried her heart on her sleeve and her fire in her eyes, and at that moment, both were aimed squarely at Bradley's betrayal. "Tori, I've been looking everywhere for you," she said breathlessly. "Where is he? What happened?" Tori opened her mouth, but no words came. It was Admiral Blackwood who answered, his voice clipped. "Bradley Hamilton left the vessel before departure." Grace froze, her gaze shifting from the Admiral to Tori. "He left you? 7 months pregnant? On a cruise ship in the middle of the Mediterranean?" Her tone was a mixture of outrage and disbelief. She knelt beside Tori, gripping her hand tightly. "That assistant of his, Elena, she's gone too. I saw the flight manifest on the lounge's departure screen." Tori's stomach churned. Hearing it spoken aloud, the betrayal solidified into something undeniable. She had seen Elena lingering too often at company parties, had felt the sting of intuition whispering warnings she ignored. Now Grace's confirmation was the final nail in the coffin. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of her father. Grace squeezed her hand harder. "You couldn't have known, Tori. You trusted him." "That's not your fault. But listen to me. We're not going to let him get away with this. My brother's a lawyer. As soon as we hit port, we'll—" "No signal," Tori interrupted, her voice flat. "We're in open water. No phones, no internet. He knew that. He left me here deliberately." The weight of that realization sank deeper than betrayal. Bradley hadn't simply abandoned her. He had timed it with precision, choosing the moment she was most isolated, most vulnerable. Admiral Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Which means this isn't about an affair," he said grimly. "This was calculated." Tori turned to him sharply. "What are you saying?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've seen men like him before. When someone walks away with that much cold efficiency, it isn't just personal, it's strategic." The air between them grew heavy. For the first time, Tori realized Bradley's disappearance might be more than betrayal. It might be the edge of something far darker. Conspiracy at sea night draped itself over the Mediterranean like a velvet curtain, the ship slicing through dark waters under a canopy of stars. Most passengers were still intoxicated by the novelty of their voyage. Laughter spilled from the restaurants, music drifted from the lounges. But in the quiet corners of the vessel, a storm was brewing. Tori Hamilton stood on the balcony of her suite, one hand resting protectively on her belly, her thoughts spiraling in ways she had never imagined. The betrayal of Bradley still stung like a fresh wound, but the more she replayed his departure in her mind, the less it felt like the reckless act of a cheating husband, and the more it resembled a calculated maneuver. Every detail, the timed note, the assistant vanishing at the same moment, the carefully booked flight, reeked of orchestration. Bradley had not simply abandoned her, he had left her stranded, deliberately cut off from the world. Grace leaned against the railing beside her, arms folded, fury etched into every line of her face. "I don't buy that this is just about Elena," she said bluntly. "Bradley's a control freak. He doesn't just walk away unless he thinks he's setting the terms. And the way he left you, Tori, this feels bigger than an affair. It feels like a setup." Tori closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to keep her emotions from fracturing. A setup for what? I've done nothing wrong. I've spent the last year being a wife, preparing to be a mother, standing by him while he built his empire. What could he possibly gain by destroying me? Grace hesitated, her voice lowering. You know I've never liked the way his business operated. The endless travel, the closed-door meetings, the vague contracts. My brother warned me once that CEOs who grow too fast usually have skeletons in their closets. What if... She trailed off, watching Tori's reaction carefully. What if you're holding the bag for something you don't even know about? The word sent a chill down Tori's spine. She remembered the countless documents Bradley had asked her to sign. Investment agreements, company filings, trust papers, always presented with a dismissive, "Just a formality, darling, nothing to worry about." He had relied on her trust, her willingness to support him without question. What if those papers tied her name to crime she hadn't even realized existed? Before she could answer, a sharp knock rattled the door. Grace tensed, but Tori moved to open it, her pulse quickening. Standing there were two men in dark suits, their presence incongruous against the casual luxury of the cruise ship. Both carried the unmistakable air of authority, their eyes scanning the suite in swift, practiced sweeps. The taller of the two introduced himself with a badge. "Mrs. Hamilton? I'm Special Agent Walker. This is Agent Ruiz. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room seemed to tilt around her. The FBI? Why would... Her voice faltered as fear threaded through her veins. Agents didn't appear without reason, and they certainly didn't board luxury cruises casually. Walker's expression was firm but not unkind. "We understand your husband disembarked earlier today in Barcelona. We need to ask you a few questions." Admiral Blackwood appeared in the hallway behind them, his presence commanding as always, though his eyes betrayed concern. He stepped inside without invitation, his tone sharp. "This is my ship. Any questioning of my passengers will go through me." Walker didn't flinch. "Respectfully, Admiral, this is a federal matter. Bradley Hamilton is under active investigation. Mrs. Hamilton may be the only person who can help us understand his recent actions." Tori's knees weakened. "What kind of investigation?" She whispered, Ruiz answered, his voice even. "Financial crimes, international fraud, money laundering, embezzlement. We have reason to believe millions of dollars have been moved illegally under accounts tied to your husband's company." He paused, glancing at her sympathetically. "Some of those accounts, Mrs. Hamilton, are in your name." The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. She gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to collapse. No, that's impossible. I don't have accounts. I don't even... Bradley handled everything. I just signed what he gave me." Walker's gaze softened slightly. "We believe you may have been unknowingly involved. But understand this. If your husband has set you up, the evidence trail will lead directly to you. Right now, in the eyes of the law, you look like a willing participant." Grace shot to her feet, outrage flaring. "That's absurd. She's a victim, not a criminal. She's pregnant, for God's sake. Do you really think she masterminded some international scheme from a nursery in New York?" But Tori barely heard them. Her mind was racing back through every moment of her marriage. The late-night phone calls, the documents pushed across the dining table, the way Bradley always brushed off her questions. She thought of his charm, his relentless ambition, the way he made her feel both cherished and controlled. How blind she had been, how easily he had woven trust into shackles. Her father stepped closer, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Victoria, listen to me. This is not your fault, but you have to be strong now. Stronger than you've ever been." His voice carried the tone of command, the voice that had led sailors into battle, yet beneath it was a tremor of paternal fear. For once, duty and family had collided, and family was winning. Tori looked up at him, tears pricking her eyes, but not of sorrow, of release. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean on him, not as the Admiral, but as her father. "I don't know how to fight this," she admitted. "He's planned everything, twisted everything. He's smarter than I gave him credit for." James Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Then we fight smarter. The Navy taught me strategy, but you've taught me something greater, resilience. We'll use both. And with Grace's determination and the FBI's reach, we'll turn his weapons back on him." As if on cue, Grace burst into the room, her phone in hand, eyes blazing. "You won't believe this," she said, breathless. "My brother dug deeper into the financial records. There's a pattern. Bradley wasn't just moving money into your accounts. He created dummy transfers that looked like they came from you, but were actually routed from offshore shells he controlled. If we can prove the forgery, we can exonerate you. Hope flared in Tori's chest, though she tempered it with caution. But will anyone believe me? He's already poisoned the narrative. Grace shook her head fiercely. The truth doesn't always shout, it builds. And once the first piece falls, the whole story unravels. We just need one undeniable crack in his armor. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of strategizing, cross-referencing files, and building a case. The FBI agents became unlikely allies, working alongside Grace and Admiral Blackwood to connect the dots. For Tori, the process was both exhausting and empowering. Every lie they uncovered was another step toward freedom. Every forged signature they disproved, another victory reclaimed. But the true turning point came in a moment she had not expected. That evening, as the ship approached the coast of Naples, she was invited once more before the cameras. This time not to defend herself, but to deliver a statement backed by evidence. With the documents laid out before her, she spoke to the world, her voice unwavering. My husband betrayed me, yes. But worse, he betrayed every investor, every employee, every person who trusted him. He used my name as a shield, but I will not be his shield any longer. Today I reclaim my truth. I will not carry his crimes. I will carry only my child, my future, and my determination to rise. Her words spread like wildfire across the globe. Headlines shifted. The narrative that had painted her as complicit began to fracture. And for the first time since Bradley's abandonment, the tide was turning in her favor. When the broadcast ended, her father placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. You have done what even I, with all my years of command, could never do. You faced the storm not with weapons, but with truth. That is strength. That is courage. Grace grinned, tears sparkling in her eyes. And that is why Bradley is already lost. He doesn't realize it yet, but he has. 2 days later, news arrived that Bradley had accepted a plea bargain. His lawyers, desperate to salvage something, had convinced him to cooperate in exchange for leniency. But the statement he gave to prosecutors confirmed what Tori already knew. She had been a pawn. His scapegoat, nothing more than a name he could use and discard. When she heard the news, Tori felt not triumph but release. The weight lifted from her shoulders, the chains of betrayal falling away. She stood on the deck of the Mediterranean Jewel, the sea wind in her hair, her hand resting on her belly, and she whispered to her unborn child, "We are free, and we will build a life on truth, not lies." Her father joined her there, the setting sun casting them both in hues of gold and crimson. "Victoria," he said quietly, "you've taught me that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what matters. I spent my life thinking medals and rank were my legacy, but now I know it's you and this child. That is my true command." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. For the first time she felt the bond of family, strong and unbreakable. Not in words or appearances, but in presence and choice. Grace joined them, laughter bubbling as she declared herself Aunt Grace already, vowing to stand beside them no matter what storms lay ahead. As the ship's horn echoed across the water, Tori felt a peace she had not known in years. She had been abandoned, betrayed, framed, and nearly broken, but she had risen. She had found strength in places she never expected, in herself, in her father, in friendship, and in the relentless fire of truth. And as the horizon stretched before her, she knew the journey was only beginning. The fall had nearly destroyed her, but the rise had remade her. And now she was no longer the woman Bradley had tried to define. She was free.